Hey there, fellow garden lovers. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to spot for everything gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces both inside your home and out in your yard. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to talk about something that might sound a bit counterintuitive at first, starting seeds indoors during December. I know, it's cold outside, the days are short, and we're all thinking about cozy fires and hot cocoa rather than gardening. But here's the thing, if you want to get a serious head start on spring and have those robust, healthy plants ready to transplant the moment the soil warms up, December is actually your secret weapon. Trust me on this one, I've been gardening for years, and some of my best harvests have come from seeds I started in the dead of winter. Now, before we dive into the specific crops, let me just paint you a picture. Imagine it's early May, and while your neighbors are just starting to plant their tomato seedlings from the garden center, you're already transplanting strong, established plants that are twice the size. That's the magic of winter seed starting. It's not about rushing nature, it's about working with nature's timeline in a smart way. December gives you this beautiful window where you can control the environment completely. You're not fighting unpredictable spring weather or late frosts. You're in your warm house, with grow lights if you need them, creating the perfect nursery for baby plants. Plus, there's something incredibly satisfying about tending to green, growing things when everything outside is brown and dormant. Let me tell you about my friend Daisy, who lives up in Zone 5. She was always frustrated because by the time she could safely plant outside, half the growing season was already gone. Then one December she decided to experiment with starting onions and leeks indoors. She set up a simple shelf with some fluorescent lights in her basement, nothing fancy, and started those seeds in late December. By the time April rolled around, she had these gorgeous, thick onion starts that went straight into the ground. Her harvest that year was triple what she'd gotten in previous years. She couldn't stop talking about it. That's when I realized December seed starting wasn't just for the hardcore gardeners, it's for anyone who wants better results. So what should you actually start in December? Well, onions are definitely at the top of my list, and they're what got Daisy hooked. Onions need a long growing season, typically around 100 to 175 days depending on the variety. If you start them from seed in December, they'll be ready to transplant outdoors in early spring, and you'll get those big, beautiful bulbs by summer. The key with onions is to keep them under lights for about 12 to 14 hours a day. They don't need intense heat. Around 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit is perfect. I like to use those basic seed starting trays, the ones with the little individual cells, and I'll put 2 or 3 seeds per cell. Once they germinate and get a couple of inches tall, I trim them back to 1 strong seedling per cell. It feels harsh, like you're wasting seeds, but trust me, that 1 seedling will develop so much better without competition. Leeks are right there with onions in terms of December planting. They're actually even more forgiving than onions in my experience. Leeks love the long, slow start, and they're incredibly cold-hardy once they're established. I remember this guy Oliver from my community garden, who grew the most magnificent leeks I'd ever seen, thick as my wrist and so tender. His secret? He started them in mid-December every single year. He'd let them grow slowly under lights, transplant them once into slightly larger containers around February, and then move them outside in April. By late summer, he had leeks that looked like they belonged in a fancy restaurant. The beauty of leeks is that they're not picky about soil. They rarely have pest problems, and they can handle a light frost like champions. Celery is another crop that absolutely benefits from December starting. Here's the thing about celery, it's notoriously slow to germinate and even slower to mature. We're talking about a crop that needs around 130 to 140 days from seed to harvest. If you wait until spring to start celery, you're often racing against hot weather, which makes celery bitter and tough. But start it in December, and you give those seeds all the time they need to wake up and grow. Celery seeds are tiny, almost like dust, and they need light to germinate, so don't bury them deep. I just press them gently onto the surface of moist seed-starting mix and cover the tray with clear plastic until I see sprouts. Keep the soil consistently moist. Celery is thirsty from day 1. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. I really do read every comment, and your feedback helps me create content that actually serves you and your growing goals. Now let's talk about some of the brassicas, because December is prime time for these cool season lovers. Cabbage is fantastic to start now. Whether you're growing early varieties for spring harvest or storage types for fall, getting cabbage started in December gives you incredibly strong plants. Cabbage seedlings are pretty tough. They can handle some cooler temperatures and don't mind being transplanted. I usually start mine in early December, let them grow for about 6 to 8 weeks indoors, then harden them off and plant them outside in late February or early March, depending on when my soil is workable. The heads you'll get from these early starts are tighter, heavier, and just overall better quality than cabbage started later. Broccoli and cauliflower follow the same timeline as cabbage. These crops need a good head start because they're racing against warm weather. Once temperatures consistently hit the 80s, broccoli and cauliflower want to bolt and go to seed. But if you start them in December and get them established early, they'll form those beautiful heads before the heat kicks in. I learned this lesson the hard way one year when I waited until late March to start broccoli. The plants grew fine, but by the time they were ready to head up, we had an unexpected heat wave, and everything bolted. I got maybe 3 decent heads out of 20 plants. The next year, I started in December, and every single plant produced a gorgeous head. Brussels sprouts are another brassica that loves the December start. These plants are slow growers. They need about 90 to 180 days depending on the variety, and they actually taste better after they've been touched by frost. Starting them in December means they'll be ready to transplant by early spring. They'll grow through summer, and you'll harvest them in fall after the first frosts have sweetened them up. There's this wonderful gardener named Rose who grew the sweetest Brussels sprouts I've ever tasted. Her secret was patience. She'd start them indoors in December, baby them along, transplant them into the garden in April, and then just let them do their thing all season. By October, she'd have these beautiful stalks loaded with tight little sprouts that were so sweet they tasted almost nutty. Artichokes might surprise you on this list, but they're perfect December starters, especially if you're in zones where you can grow them as perennials, or if you treat them as annuals in colder zones. Artichokes need a long growing season and benefit tremendously from vernalization. That's the cold period that triggers them to produce flower buds, which are what we eat. Starting them in December, growing them for a few weeks warm, then giving them a cold treatment before spring planting sets them up perfectly. I've grown artichokes in Zone 6 by starting them in December, and while they're not quite as prolific as they would be in California, I still get a decent harvest of those gorgeous, meaty buds. Herbs deserve their spot on this December starting list too. Rosemary is notoriously slow from seed. It can take 3 or 4 weeks just to germinate, and then it grows at a snail's pace for months. But start it in December, and by spring you'll have actual usable plants instead of tiny sprigs. Rosemary likes warmth for germination, around 70 to 75 degrees, so I keep my seed tray on top of the refrigerator where it's warm. Once it sprouts, it needs lots of light and relatively dry conditions. I know a gardener named Ivy who starts rosemary every December, and by summer she has these beautiful bushy plants that she sells at the farmer's market. Her trick is patience and not overwatering. Rosemary hates wet feet. Thyme is similar to rosemary in its slow growth from seed. Starting thyme in December means you're not sitting around in April waiting for tiny seeds to finally decide to sprout. Thyme seeds are very small and need light to germinate, so scatter them on the surface of your seed mix and just press them in gently. They'll germinate in about 2 weeks with warmth and light, and then they grow slowly but steadily. By the time you're ready to plant outdoors, you'll have nice little thyme plants ready to establish themselves in your herb garden. Parsley is another herb that benefits from early starting. It's a biennial that's slow to germinate, sometimes taking 3 or 4 weeks, and it needs a long season if you want those big, bushy plants that keep producing all season. I soak parsley seeds overnight before planting them, which seems to help speed up germination a bit. Once they're up and growing, parsley is pretty easy going. Keep it watered, give it decent light, and it'll reward you with months of fresh herbs. Now here's something a lot of people don't think about. Starting peppers in December. Wait, what? Peppers in December? Hear me out. If you're growing hot peppers, especially super hots or any of the really slow maturing varieties, December starting makes total sense. Some pepper varieties can take 150 days or more from seed to harvest. If you're in a northern climate with a short growing season, starting peppers in December gives them the time they need to actually produce fruit. I'm talking about varieties like ghost peppers, Scotch bonnets, habaneros. These guys need all the time you can give them. Now you'll need to keep them warm and under lights for months, and you might need to pot them up once or twice before they go outside, but the payoff is worth it. My buddy Lucas starts all his super hot peppers right after Christmas, and by the time he transplants them in late May, they're already flowering. His harvests are legendary in our gardening group. Sweet peppers can also benefit from December starting if you're in a shorter season area. Varieties that need 100 days or more will appreciate the head start. The key with any pepper starting is warmth. They need soil temperatures around 75 to 80 degrees to germinate well. I use a seedling heat mat for peppers, and it makes a huge difference. Without bottom heat, peppers can take weeks to germinate and might not germinate at all. With heat, they pop up in 7 to 10 days. Tomatoes are iffy for December starting unless you have a very specific plan. For most gardeners, December is too early for tomatoes. They grow fast, and if you start them in December, they'll be huge and leggy by the time it's safe to plant them outside. However, if you have a greenhouse or high tunnel where you can plant them in early spring while it's still too cold for outdoor planting, December tomato starting can work. Or if you're planning to grow certain tomatoes as large container plants that you'll keep indoors or move outside only when it's warm, December works. Generally though, I recommend waiting until late January or February for tomatoes unless you have that controlled environment. Lettuce and other salad greens can absolutely be started in December, especially if you're planning to grow them in a cold frame, high tunnel, or even just under row covers for early spring harvest. Lettuce germinates quickly and grows fast, so you don't want to start it too early, but starting lettuce around mid to late December for transplanting into protected growing spaces in late February or early March works beautifully. You can also succession plant lettuce every couple of weeks starting in December, so you have a continuous supply of seedlings ready to go out as space becomes available. Lettuce doesn't mind being transplanted when it's small, and it actually establishes better than direct-seeded lettuce when the weather is cool and unpredictable. Spinach is another green that works well for December starting if you're planning protected culture. Like lettuce, spinach is fast-growing and prefers cool weather. Starting it indoors in December and transplanting it into a cold frame or under row covers in late winter gives you those tender baby greens weeks before you could direct seed outside. Spinach is also surprisingly frost-hardy once it's established, so those transplants can handle some pretty chilly conditions. Here's a crop that not enough people grow, celeriac, also called celery root. It's got that same long, slow-growing cycle as celery, but instead of stalks, you're growing it for the bulbous root that tastes like celery but with this wonderful nutty, earthy quality. Celeriac absolutely needs to be started in December or even earlier because it takes forever to size up. We're talking 120 days or more from seed to harvestable root. Start celeriac just like celery. Surface sow those tiny seeds, keep them moist, give them light. The seedlings look a lot like celery seedlings at first, and they're just as thirsty. By starting in December, you give celeriac the full season it needs to develop those gorgeous roots. The beautiful thing about December seed starting is that you're working during the quiet season. There's no rush, no pressure from weather or planting deadlines. You can take your time, observe your seedlings carefully, and really learn how each crop behaves from its very beginning. I keep a simple notebook where I write down what I started, when I started it, and how it performed. Over the years, this has become my most valuable gardening tool because I can look back and see exactly what worked in my specific conditions. Let's talk about the practical setup for a minute, because you don't need anything fancy to start seeds in December. I mean, sure, you can invest in elaborate grow light systems and heated propagation stations if you want, but I started my first December seeds on a folding table in my basement with 2 shop lights hanging above it. The lights were basic fluorescent tubes, nothing special, and they worked perfectly fine. The key is getting those lights close to the seedlings, about 2 to 4 inches above them, and keeping them on for 14 to 16 hours a day. As the seedlings grow, you raise the lights to maintain that distance. I use a simple timer so I don't have to remember to turn the lights on and off every day. Temperature is important but not as critical as you might think for most of these crops. Room temperature, around 65 to 70 degrees, works fine for growing most seedlings once they've germinated. For germination, some crops like warmth, that's where a heat mat helps, but once they're up, they actually prefer it a bit cooler. This is especially true for the cool season crops like the brassicas and alliums. They're perfectly happy at 60 to 65 degrees, and if it gets much warmer, they can get leggy and weak. Watering is where a lot of people run into trouble with indoor seedlings. The biggest mistake is overwatering. Those little seedlings in their tiny cells don't need much water, and the soil takes forever to dry out under lights compared to outside in the sun and wind. I check my seedlings every day, but I usually only water every 2 to 3 days, and sometimes less. I water from the bottom when possible. I set the seed trays in a larger tray filled with an inch of water and let them soak it up for 20 minutes or so, then drain off any excess. This encourages roots to grow down looking for water instead of staying shallow. When I do water from the top, I use a spray bottle or a very gentle watering can so I don't disturb those tiny seeds or blast the seedlings over. One thing I've learned over the years is the importance of air circulation. Indoor seedlings are prone to damping off, which is this fungal disease that basically makes the stem rot right at the soil line and the whole seedling just topples over. It's heartbreaking to watch a whole tray of healthy seedlings suddenly collapse. Good air circulation helps prevent this. I run a small oscillating fan on low speed near my seedlings, not blowing directly on them, just creating some air movement in the room. This also helps strengthen the stems, so when you eventually transplant them outside, they're not weak and floppy. Speaking of transplanting, most of these December-started crops will need to be potted up at least once before going outside. When a seedling has its first true leaves, that's the second set of leaves that appear, the ones that look like actual plant leaves rather than the rounded seed leaves. It's usually ready to be moved to a larger container. I pot up into 3-inch or 4-inch pots, depending on how long the plant will be indoors. This gives the roots room to grow and prevents the plants from becoming root-bound and stunted. Use good quality potting soil for this, not garden soil. Garden soil is too heavy and doesn't drain well in containers. Hardening off is the final crucial step before your December babies go into the garden. This is the process of gradually acclimating indoor-grown plants to outdoor conditions. You can't just take a plant that's been under lights in your warm house for months and plunk it straight into the garden. It'll go into shock and might die. Hardening off takes about a week. Start by putting your plants outside in a sheltered spot for an hour or two on a mild day, then bring them back in. Each day, increase the time they spend outside and gradually expose them to more sun and wind. By the end of the week, they can stay out overnight if temperatures are appropriate. I know this seems like a hassle, but it's absolutely necessary. I've watched neighbors lose entire flats of beautiful seedlings because they skipped hardening off. The rewards of December seed starting go beyond just getting a jump on the season. There's this incredible satisfaction in nurturing something from a tiny seed through the coldest, darkest months, and then watching it thrive in the spring garden. It connects you to the growing cycle in a deeper way. You're not just a consumer of plants from the garden center. You're a grower, a cultivator, someone who understands the complete life cycle of the food you eat. Plus, the variety. Garden centers typically carry maybe a dozen common varieties of any given vegetable. When you start from seed, you have access to hundreds or even thousands of varieties. Want to grow a purple cauliflower, a baseball bat-sized leek, an artichoke with purple bracts? You can do all of that starting from seed in December. There's also an economic angle that's worth mentioning. A packet of seeds might cost $3 to $4 and contain 50 or more seeds. Compare that to buying transplants at $5 or $6 each in spring, and the savings add up fast. Especially for crops like onions, where you might want 50 or 100 plants, growing from seed is dramatically cheaper. Plus, you can save seeds from many of these crops to use in future years, making it even more economical. I've been growing the same strain of leeks for 5 years now. Started from a single packet of seeds, just by letting a few plants go to seed each year. As we wrap up here, I want to encourage you to try this even if you're nervous about it. Start small, maybe just a flat of onions or a few cells of broccoli. See how it goes. You'll learn so much from that first attempt, and each year you'll get better at it. I truly believe that December seed starting changed my gardening life. It extended my growing season, improved my harvests, and gave me something productive and hopeful to do during the darkest months of winter. There's something almost magical about working with living, growing things, when the world outside is frozen and dormant. It reminds you that spring is coming, that growth is always possible, and that with a little planning and care, you can create abundance even from the smallest seeds started on the shortest days of the year. So grab some seeds, set up a space, and start growing. Your spring garden will thank you, and you might just discover, like I did, that December is actually one of the best months of the whole gardening year.